Hey everyone, back again. Let us continue now with Eichmann in Jerusalem, and today we're going to cover chapters 8 through 12. Now, you know what the deal is. If you're just tuning into this, go check out episodes 1 and 2. Obviously, please consider donating to one of the organizations below. If you live in a city where students are currently engaged in encampments, in protesting the Israeli regime's mass slaughter of Palestinians, and their push to get the students' push to get their institutions to divest from Israel, please consider helping them, bringing them supplies. You can follow them on Instagram. Any SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine organization that is associated with any school, they post stuff on there constantly asking for specific things that they need to keep their encampments going. Please consider doing that, because they need all the help they can get, given the amount of repression that they are experiencing at the hands of our police state. Meanwhile, as all the Zionists are taking to Twitter and to the mainstream media, a term I never thought I would say earnestly, the mainstream media, to cry about the words that people are using to describe the mass slaughter of Palestinians while saying nothing about the slaughter of Palestinians themselves. And I think this is one perfect way to understand the banality of evil, shifting the focus to a focus about words instead of actions, as though words somehow mean more. If anyone allocates any amount of energy calling attention to either student protests or the specific words people use to describe Israel's mass slaughter of Palestinians, more than 15,000 of which are children, like kids. Imagine if that was happening in the U.S. Would the U.S. be like, oh yeah, this is okay? Just imagine for a second if, let's say, Mexico did that to people in Texas. Would the U.S. be then arming Mexico? For Mexico to reclaim its territory in Texas, for example? Would that be okay? And please consider, sharing this, and not just my stuff. Engage with everything you see related to Palestine online, in person. It needs all the support it can get right now. And it's not just this cause, of course. There are so many other things going on in the world right now that need our attention. Allocate time to all of them. I mean, we have an obligation on this planet to leave it in a better state than we entered it. I think that if there is any meaning to what it means to be human, that is it. Do that to guarantee our futurity, to guarantee the possibility that people in the future will be able to live, and they will be able to live a life free of abuse, free of government repression. And this is just me being the classic liberal. I'm a big fan of John Locke. I think maybe government shouldn't be mass slaughtering people. I'm a big fan of them. John Locke, classic. But anyways, to move beyond the editorializing, the grandstanding, let us jump into Chapter 8 of Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem, what I think is one of the more important anti-Zionist texts out there, even though it's not recognized as such for lots of reasons. But this, all of Arendt's texts after World War II, The Origins of Totalitarianism, or not all of them, but many of her texts deal with the amount of violence that Israel has inflicted against the Palestinians, while justifying it because of the Holocaust, which it blows my mind. But Chapter 8, Duties of a Law-Abiding Citizen. Now, for all intents and purposes, Eichmann was a law-abiding citizen. He followed the law. He was just like, this is part of the banality of evil. He was, quote-unquote, kind of a regular dude. He didn't have many thoughts. He wasn't very creative. He just did what he was told. He wasn't able to think. And this was one of the problems, actually, for Arendt. He just followed orders. However, his agency, his ability for autonomous thought and action became somewhat apparent when, during his interrogation, he invoked Immanuel Kant, specifically Immanuel Kant's idea of the categorical imperative, which, in short, I've done episodes just on that if you want to go check them out, but in short, the categorical imperative for Kant reads, or states, that you act in such a way as your act could be applied as a universal law. So you do things in such a way where you ask yourself, would anyone else in the same situation do the same thing? And if the answer is yes, then you can comfortably say you are abiding by the categorical imperative. One of the other elements of this term, though, that Kant, quote unquote, proves, is that every single law must be construed and developed in a way that respects that people are ends in themselves and not a means to an end. That is, we should never construct a law that makes people, reduces them to as a means to an end. So this is, how a Kantian would critique enslavement, because enslavement and the laws that justify it and proffer it up and keep it going, these laws reduce enslaved people, like in the US, mostly black people, to the status of a means to an end. They are not ends in themselves. And we're seeing this on display as well in terms of the abortion debate in the US. How this is still a topic of discussion blows my mind. But in any case, in this debate, we see that the categorical imperative is being trampled on in the reduction of women and other people who can give birth, reduction of them to being a means to an end to the fetus that they may be able to give birth to. And I had a funny comment. I've been getting lots of fun comments lately, and lots of fun comments, lots of fun messages saying that, I hate all the white dudes, I hate all the classics, because I care about things. I care about racism and sexism. But I'm a diehard Kantian. I believe in classic liberal values, and I think that infringing upon somebody's right to their own body, to choosing anything that can happen to their own body, is a breach of the categorical imperative. And I think that it's really messed up that I need to invoke Kant to justify why people should have bodily autonomy, mostly women. But in any case, this is to respond to all of those people who think I no longer adhere or believe I see the value of those old dead white dudes. I do. And I will apply that idea and use them to destroy anybody in an argument that I see fit. Now, Eichmann claimed to be following Kant's categorical imperative because he believed he was acting as anyone else would act in following those orders. Now, obviously, Arendt is like, no, dude, you are just looking at Germany, at the Reich, and being like, this was the universal law there. But Kant is not saying this is like a national, we're just referring to national laws when we're talking about the categorical imperative. This has to be universal. This has to apply everywhere if we are to come up with a pure idea of justice. I'm just using pure idea very loosely there. Obviously the term pure has a very specific connotation in Kant. Be kind to me, Kantians. I'm just using that term flippantly. So he interpreted the categorical imperative as applying to the law of the land. So when the final solution was brought forward by the higher members of the SS, to which Eichmann was just a receptor. He didn't design it. He wasn't an architect of it. He was given these orders by Himmler, and then from Hitler down through Himmler and then into to Eichmann. He construed this as being the universal law, as the law of the land. Now, Kant would clearly disagree, and so does Arendt. Now, in any case, he thought that this was an argument worth putting forward, and Arendt takes this as another sign of really how unintelligent Eichmann was. He could just recite and repeat ideas without fully understanding them, without fully being able to deploy his capacity for thought. Now, I'm a fan of Arendt in some respects. I'm obviously very critical of Arendt. Her writings on segregation are deplorable and need to be challenged till the end of time. And this is another thing that I'm not totally in line with Arendt about, specifically her faith in reason, in thought, to deter things like the Holocaust from ever happening again, where we actually know that there was lots of thought, lots of quote unquote rationality put into the Holocaust and making it function so smoothly with the aid of non-Jewish allies in many different countries, allies to the Germans, with the Jewish Council of Elders, with Jewish police, who were able to help the Nazis round up their own community members. Of course, we can't deny that. But it was a well-lubricated, quote-unquote, rational machine in its perfection, in its organization, to carry out the murder of 6 million Jews, countless other Roma people and disabled people, gay people, and so on. So it's not as though I don't believe that, if people just had the capacity for thought, as Hannah Arendt lays it out, then suddenly people would be able to see how this is fundamentally wrong. That is to fly in the face of the way that thought itself and her faith in reason has historically been used to justify colonizing people on the basis of their being less reasonable and therefore being less developed, therefore being less human. We can't discount that. And I think that this is an issue within her reading of the elements that led up to the Holocaust. Now, the end of the war was a strange period for Eichmann, because toward the end of the war in 1944, he and others were given the orders to stop the exterminations and to deconstruct the death chambers, the gas chambers and death camps. So, to get rid of the evidence, which must have been bizarre for him. And at this period as well, because, he was just quote unquote following orders. And as we made clear, he was no fan of the final solution, but he was just following orders, at least as per all the evidence that the trial revealed. This period also saw him introduced to another SS member, though, a guy named, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Becher, Becher, Becker, who was defying Nazi orders by stealing Jewish land in Hungary after deporting them. So there were a number of Nazi officials who actually, and this is kind of an esoteric point in Arendt's text, who actually curried favor with leaders, including Jewish leaders, by being corrupt. So these Nazi officials who were just kind of greedy for themselves demonstrated that greed and were like, look, we're just in it for ourselves. We don't actually believe in the Nazi Party's project here. So you can trust us because we are kind of these rogue elements. We're going to do our best to help you. We just want to get rich. And Eichmann was not a fan of this because he was like just following orders. He was like, all I want to do is do my job, which was a further sign of his lack of autonomy, his lack of his any ability to think about what he was doing. Not to mention as well, like he was working still, or he had worked with Kostner, the Zionist Kostner, who we mentioned earlier. Now, Eichmann was no fan of Becher, whatever. And he began to be alienated from the moderate wing of the SS, quote moderate, in quotes, like moderate wing of the SS. Eichmann committed himself to Hitler's orders, just following orders, even when Himmler, his closest superior, gave him different orders, because Eichmann so much adhered to the Nazi Party's overall project, and he viewed himself as just a cog in that project, that he saw no ability to even follow any orders that conflicted with that project. Hence, why he was like so surprised when the order came for the death camps to be deconstructed. And so he defied Himmler's orders in order to adhere to the broader project outlined and created by Hitler. And this actually landed him in some trouble. That is, Eichmann's transgression landed him a demotion from Jewish affairs to his department, to the department that was titled The Fight Against the Churches. Because remember, the Nazis weren't just going after the Jews. They were going after so many other people, none of whom got their own state out of this, by the way, which is another issue in all of this. Like, where was the Roma court that was, would suggest that the Roma people then needed a state? Why is it that this was reserved for one group of people? Which isn't I'm not trying to equate these oppressions, but I think that it's super important that we reckon with that fact. Now we move to chapter 9, and what will begin a series of chapters looking at the various measures that were put in terms of deportation from various parts of Europe, deporting Jews from various parts of Europe. And we start with chapter 9. In chapter 9, deportations from the Reich, Germany, Austria, and the Protectorate. Now, between 1942 and 1944, when Germany was facing a steady stream of defeats, they had the Red Army coming, they were losing battles to the Allies, it wasn't looking good for them. Executions and deportations ramped up. This is when the final solution really kicked into high gear, and obviously, as horrendous as that is. Now, in Jerusalem, the prosecution ignored Eichmann's relatively low position at this time. He wasn't an architect here, right? He wasn't making these decisions. He was just doing these things that were told of him, which again, I have to make so clear because anything can be construed as anti-Semitism these days. Obviously, he was culpable, and obviously, he deserved punishment for it. Clearly. At this time, he was responsible with moving Jews, but not how many, nor to where, nor to what was going to happen to them, because whether they would be sent for hard labor, whether they would be sent deported to outside of Europe entirely, whether they would be sent just to a concentration camp that was not equipped with with gas chambers, or to the gas chambers, or to the death camps. He didn't have any decision-making power in any of that. Again, though, he was culpable. He was participating in what is the worst genocide of the 20th century. Now, deportations didn't just start happening suddenly. In 1940 and 1941, the Germans tested deportations of small quantities of Jews to assess how the public would respond, to see if they would catch wind of it and if they would, start to revolt against it, and how other countries would respond to them. And the public was largely ambivalent and indifferent. They didn't care. Clearly, because anti-Semitism was just so rampant, most of the public were probably thrilled at the thought of Jews being deported from their towns and cities and villages. Now, the same would be seen by many other governments. Not all, and we're going to look at them specifically, but many were like, whatever. Not all, but many were, especially in Eastern Europe. Not Poland, though. Remember, that's illegal. Can't say that. Can't say that the Polish government participated in the Nazi Holocaust at all. It's illegal. Now, Germany wanted to rid itself of Jews first. Wanted Jews out of the Reich, unless they were Zionists. And Zionist Jews were free to move around and stuff. But when Hitler first communicated plans to start deporting Jews, one of their first steps was to remove the statehood, to remove German statehood from many Jews. And if they had dual citizenships, those other countries recalled the Jewish people back to those countries because they're like, what's going on here? Which Germany saw as a success because their goal was to get Jews out of Germany. And so they were okay with that. But as Germany also started to move into these other countries, then it became an issue where they had to get the Jews out of there as well, which, obviously horrendous. What followed was horrendous. Now, in 1943, the Reich, Germany, declared itself Judenrein, which was Jewless or Jew-free at that time. And that puts us here into chapter 10. Deportations from Western Europe, not Germany now. Western Europe, France, Belgium, Holland, Denmark, Italy. Now, the same effort to become Jewless or Judenrein extended to other Western European countries like France under the Vichy government. France wasn't so eager to send French national Jews, though. Only the stateless ones, of which they were more than willing to include children, as per their agreement with Germany. So France didn't want to send French Jews or to deport them, but they were more than willing to do that with Jews who were taking refuge in France or who did not have French statehood. Now, in the early days in 1940 and 1941, many of these countries that were working with Germany didn't know what Germany had planned. They thought Jews were just being sent to Eastern Europe, to Palestine, to colonize that land. They thought they were just being sent away. They did not know about the final solution, which isn't to defend them. Like, they are still culpable. It was still anti-Semitism that they were participating in that deserves all of the disciplinary pushback that we can possibly mount against them. But in 1942, when they caught wind of what Germany's plan really was, they moved further away from Germany in participating with them and cooperating with the Germans by refusing to revoke recently administered passports to French Jews. Because even those Jewish people who had only recently received a French passport would have them revoked. And so they started to reverse that procedure and to take away recently administered passports. Now, Arendt's point here is that even minimal resistance, and this is going to be a recurring thread through these other countries that we're going to look at, even minimal resistance, the tiniest bit from non-German states would have halted Germany's plans or greatly stifled them, perhaps saved millions of Jews. It took very little resistance, as we will see. Countries like Belgium and Holland were under near total German rule, and because of that, they were incapable of resistance. They were under German rule. And as we will see with all of these countries, from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, with Romania, Hungary, Slovenia, the Czechs, all of these different countries, Arendt uses them to say, like, the deportation of Jews and sending them to the death camps was on a European scale, a European diplomatic and military effort orchestrated by the highest levels of the German officials and the Nazi Party. Eichmann had no role. Like, relative to all of that, he had no role. He was just one pawn in an entire system. And as she's made so clear, and one of the points throughout her book is like, why was Eichmann the one who was singled out for all of this when his name never even emerged in the Nuremberg trials that tried all the highest Nazi officials? And it's because that he could be so easily scapegoated as standing in for the entire embodiment of Nazi anti-Semitism that could then be used for Israel's media spectacle in Jerusalem to try him and to have him executed for everything that happened during the Holocaust. Now, in Holland, even though it was under Nazi occupation, protests and strikes erupted against anti-Jewish measures. The Nazis worked around this with their strong presence and cooperation of Dutch Jews in the Joodse Raad. I can't, pronunciation. Joodsche Raad, who helped single out foreign Jews while protecting Dutch Jews. They were more than willing to send their non-Dutch Jews to their death. You could look any of this up. There's not a thing I'm saying in any of these episodes that I have not verified myself. So go look that up if you're curious about it. In 1943, the Nazis began to include Dutch Jews, though, killing more than 100,000, or approximately 75% of all Dutch Jews. Italy and Bulgaria, however, resisted German genocide, but did so covertly by shielding Jews and withholding their information, which it was that easy. Like, that's all it took. And a minimal amount of resistance and a minimal amount of cooperation would have saved millions of more lives. And this is why it is so important to stand beside Palestinians to defend them from Israel's slaughter. How Israel is slaughtering them every single day. And it just takes a little bit of resistance to get them to stop. Now, the way that Italy was able to do this was just by concealing their information that they had about Jews and, making sure that the Germans couldn't get their hands on it. Now, of the non-Allied countries, Denmark perhaps was the most effective at pushing back on Nazi encroachment on and protecting their Jewish people. They are the only ones to really have opposed overtly Nazi rule, Nazi efforts to deport their Jews. When Germany proposed that the Danes brand their Jewish people with the yellow star, the king told the Nazis that he would be the first one to wear it. So they just directly said no to the Nazis. And that's all it took to protect countless Jews. Countless. Now, to get around this, the Nazis had sent a quasi-police force to Denmark to apprehend Jews who opened their own doors to them, which was haunting. So Germany sent its own agents to Denmark, and they knew that they had to do it secretly, and they would just go knocking on doors, and if a Jewish family opened their door to them, they would arrest them. But this made it so much more difficult for the Nazis to complete their goals in Denmark. And the Danish authorities quickly caught wind of this and communicated it to Jewish officials, Jewish religious figures, who then communicated it to the broader Jewish community in synagogues and other places. So they then went into hiding, which was relatively easy because Danes were willing to conceal them. And Danish resistance shattered the Nazi myth of their toughness, their being tough. Their success was not because of their cunning force, like of the Nazis' cunning force, but the conformity of other states with their project, and because they too, many of which were anti-Semitic. And that puts us into chapter 11, deportations from the Balkans, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Romania. And these countries had complex demographic histories, and the Nazis used this to their advantage. Many of these countries were rife with conflicts between different ethnic groups, all vying for their own identities, vying for their own political autonomy, and so on, and the Nazis capitalized on this. And they would side with those who sided with them in these conflicts within these countries, which added a layer of complexity, added a layer of difficulty in actually opposing the Nazis. They gained massive popular support. And the Jews here were extremely vulnerable in Eastern Europe because anti-Semitism was just absolutely horrendous. In Yugoslavia, the wealthy Jews who could assimilate were of the few to survive, while others were sent to death camps in Yugoslavia. In Serbia, as we saw much earlier, the Nazis and Serbs took to firing squads to kill Jews in a chaotic display of horrendous violence. Bulgaria probably posed the most resistance, but it wasn't active resistance per se. It was more that they had a well-established legal and political system that didn't make rash pivots and decisions just on a dime, like willing to just deport entire swaths of its own population, of its Jewish people, without running through legal channels and everything, which Arendt celebrates. She's a big fan of checks and balances in this way. Now, simply, in Bulgaria, King Boris was neutral towards the Nazis, but wouldn't just play ball in the way that the Nazis did. And one of the elements of totalitarianism that Hannah Arendt really stresses in the origins of totalitarianism is that it is chaotic. It is chaotic, but it adopts its own logic of chaos, where chaos becomes part of its sustaining factor. And it is guided by some fundamental beliefs, like belief in the blood of the nation or the people, instead of institutions that actually keep things in check. And this allows, or this faith in these ephemeral, nebulous identity markers to unite people, instead of faith in institutions that keep people in check. Faith in these things guide the totalitarian system of chaotic violence so that it's difficult to oppose, because chances are if you oppose it, you will just be attacked, assassinated, imprisoned, and so on. But actually grasping its structure and the way that force is being applied becomes difficult as well. Now, King Boris put up some resistance. Like, he wasn't like opposing the Nazis per se, but he believed in structure, which the Nazis, they did have structure, obviously, but it was a structure of chaos and just like anarchy, just guided by Hitler's like immediate rule. And mysteriously, he died shortly after visiting Hitler, I think just a few days after visiting Hitler in 1943. And there's speculation that he was assassinated or he's poisoned. I don't know if that's true, obviously, but in any case, that happened. Now, Greece was much more accommodating. Rabbi Koretz stepped up to the plate as well, where he worked as the Nazis' Jewish liaison, eventually replacing Shabbatai Saltiel, sorry about the pronunciation, in the Jewish Council. So that guy was instrumental in Greece in helping the Nazis coordinate Jewish movement and deportation. Now, Romania was an entirely different beast. Anti-Semitism in Romania was so horrendous. They were overall so hostile to Jews that the SS apparently had to intervene, according to Arendt, to quote-unquote save Jews from sheer butchery so that the killing could be done in what, according to them, was a civilized way, where apparently in Romania, Jews through pogroms were being ripped from their homes, brutally murdered in front of their families in unbelievable conditions. And the Nazis were no fan of that, not because they wanted to side with the Jews, of course, but they wanted to kill Jews in a more systematic fashion that was not at the level of chaos as what was happening in Romania. But this is one of the horrendous things about the Nazis, is that they actually viewed the gas chambers, they actually viewed the death camps as being a humanitarian way to kill people, which is an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense. But because it could be done systematically without them knowing and relatively without pain compared to other forms, I'm not saying that that's the case, but this is what they believed, then therefore they could absolve themselves of guilt in the way that they were doing it, because they believed that, they were trying to get rid of this horrible population within Europe, the Jewish people, and they were doing Europe a favor in this way. And Romania therefore rivaled Nazi Germany in its anti-Semitism. However, in 1942, Romania changed its outlook. They stopped massacring Jews and sought to instead extract money from them to ship them to Palestine, because they're like, well, we could murder them, or we could cooperate with the Zionist leaders and Nazis to send them to Palestine for money. Money from various leaders, but money as well from Jews who were willing to pay everything they had just to survive, many of whom had to do that to survive, to then be shipped somewhere else, even though many of them viewed Romania, or like many who were in Hungary or in Germany, viewed Hungary or Germany as their homes, were forced to then leave and go to Palestine. And then we know that and displace nearly 1 million Palestinians and begin 75 years of steadily murdering them. Seeing how this is, seeing how it's playing out today. And that puts us into chapter 12, deportations from Central Europe, Hungary and Slovakia. Now, in the early 20th century, Hungary was rife with poverty and greed, and largely under the single political rule of Niklaus von Harty, who was an admiral, I believe, but a military person who was kind of its quasi-ruler at the time. Now, their scattered political structure was hardly a well-established, well-oiled political structure, created a lot of public unrest, and that made them extra susceptible to fascism. Fascism thrives in places of chaos and political unrest. And it really resembled Italian fascism more so than German fascism. Now, in 1938, they passed their first anti-Jewish legislation, which mostly affected Jews in annexed and captured territories, so not their own national Hungarian Jews. At the time, there were Jewish military people and politicians who weren't affected because of their Hungarian status, so certain Jews who were given a privileged status. Not to mention racialization here, views about Eastern Jews. The more East they were, the less Western they were, and how anti-Semitism also dovetails with European racism and the treatment of non-European Jews. All of this played a part here. Now, certain Jews were given certain privileges, like military ones, political ones, wealthy ones, and they would act upon the racism within Europe to primarily target Eastern Jews and Jews who were from, even in the Middle East, even though they didn't have a hand there so much. And in 1944, the Nazis took over, and Eichmann set up his team and opened dialogue with Jewish leaders in Hungary. Now, in Hungary, the Jewish Council would be called the Central Jewish Committee in Hungary. It was led by Hofrat Stern, who was more than willing to send Jews to concentration camps, knowing full well what was happening there and what would happen to them. There was another Jewish Orthodox group, though, under the leadership of Freudiger, who between 1941 and 1943 bribed Nazis to stop sending Slovakian Jews to Auschwitz. Obviously a good thing. In 1944, after being made aware, though, of the Auschwitz protocols, so the Auschwitz protocols were when, in 1944, people actually started to learn what was happening at Auschwitz and other death camps. Through his cooperation with the Nazis, he continued to aid the Nazis, that is Freudiger, who had tried to save them, continued to aid the Nazis and not warn Jews about what was actually happening when they were being deported, because many of them were still being told fairy tales that they were being deported to Palestine or being deported to concentration camps or work camps, which is a better alternative to dying, but still horrendous. They kept this from them. However, he and his family members worked with Nazis so they could be safe in Palestine. They could save themselves and realize their Zionist dreams while not warning other Jews about what the Nazis were doing to them. Very great stuff. Sounds like anti-Semitism to me. And then there was Joel Brand, a Zionist in Budapest who was very willing to cooperate with the Nazis. Oh, Joel Brand. To his credit, although the history is unclear, a lot of Joel Brand's history is still up for debate, is up for contention. He tried to save 1 million Jews through his cooperation. Now, is the effort to try to redeem the harm, does it eclipse the harm? I know a lot of these people were obviously put in a position where they had no choice but to cooperate with the Nazis. Not everyone, but still, it's very willing to cooperate with Nazis if it meant realizing these Zionist aspirations. Now, Zionists in Budapest were treated like non-Jews by the Nazis. They could even freely move throughout the Reich, throughout Nazi Germany, without having to wear a star, without being identified, without being harassed. Now, Slovakia, too, hardly had a political identity. Their anti-Semitism was inspired by animosity towards Jewish wealth, obviously an exaggerated belief, because Jews didn't have wealth. There may have been a few rich Jewish people, like any other religious identity or any other cultural identity. But people in Slovakia and the anti-Semitism there would exaggerate that wealth and make a broader point about Jewish wealth that would connect with Jewish conspiracy theories and so on. Now, between 1938 and 1941, Slovakia transferred Jewish wealth and property to non-Jews. It was, they wanted to reclaim that power, that wealth. Now, in 1942, they grew more radical and violent and began working with Germans to send Jews to the east, from where they'd never return. They did not send as many baptized or secular Jews as other places, though, where some other countries were willing to send. Didn't matter if Jews converted to Christianity or, they were baptized or didn't identify as Jewish. Slovakia wasn't so willing to send those people, even though other countries were. The Slovakian government did not know that their people were actually being sent to their deaths, though. The Germans kept this from them. something they must have realized when, upon requesting an opportunity to visit the resettlements, they were denied. It was like they must have caught wind of it at that point. Like, why can't we actually visit these places that you're sending our people? And yeah, we'll conclude there and pick up with chapter 13 next time and continue to the end of the book and include the epilogue. But yeah, if there's anything I got wrong, anything I omitted, I'd love to hear about it. This is all very heavy stuff, very important stuff to know. And yeah, on that note, consider donating to one of the organizations below, helping protesters now if you can. And yeah, on that note, take care.